Just a little bit of F-sharp Native American flute there to go along with some humpback quail songs. Greetings and welcome. This is Jeff Phillips Wefferson coming at you from beautiful mouth of the Barham River at Apollo Bay on the Great Ocean Road, Victoria, Australia, Gondwana land. It's Wednesday, the 23rd of October. This is broadcast 3ZZ, that's 300. And I've got a very special show to record in honor of the fact that we're coming up on, or actually within, one of two periods of time each year when the Earth passes through or encounters fragments or debris or daughter products from Comet Encke, believed to be a supercomet whose disintegration and fragmentation has led to one or more planetary level catastrophes from impacts from these fragments over the geological history of the Earth, including the Chicxulub impact in the Yucatan that many people believe led to the mass extinction event of 65 million years ago. I don't know if event is actually the right word for it. So many things have to do with our misunderstanding of what we call time. For example, climate and climate change. It's very much of a temporal misunderstanding about what climate is not something that happens or changes overnight. Climate is a function of very long periods of time. The original climatologists were geologists. So they were talking about probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years of a climatological era where climate might have basically more or less stayed the same for that long. Then, through different kind of driving factors or mechanisms, changed, but not overnight, not even in a human lifetime, not over a few years. In honor of being in one of the Encke windows, which I recorded 2 radio shows about back in late June, early July from Great Barrier Island. This show is called Comets, Theomachy, and Cataclysmic Evolution. Domain overlay complexity in the Encke window. I'll define some of these words. You all know what comets are. Comets are large objects, rock and ice, other materials that are sort of out in space. A lot of them are in various kinds of orbits and around the sun. I'm not sure what the longest period of a known comet is, probably in the thousands of years, because I guess ultimately, if you've only seen it once, you can't be sure it's a comet. I mean, maybe they would have to extrapolate and guess what its orbit would be, and even then, that's based on the assumption that orbit is not going to be disturbed or perturbed by other influences, which is extremely likely to happen. So I do know that Comet Encke is the comet with the shortest period. It's like 3.2 or 3.5 years. So it's the one that comes around most often, and it is responsible for the torrid meteor shower that we see in November. Theomachy, that's Theomachy, is a word that I first read in Emanuel Velikovsky's book, I believe Worlds in Collision, or it might have been Earth in Upheaval. And I don't know if it's a word that he made up or not, but it means war of the gods. So that's what people in the not all that distant past would have seen, or might have thought in their quote-unquote primitive imaginations. They would have seen events happening up in the sky. For example, 2 planets colliding, or bolts of lightning discharging between bodies in the sky, different kind of, gaseous emissions and tails and streamers and comets passing through, and all different kind of things like that. And apparently, a few hundred or thousand years ago, there was a lot more activity like that going on in the heavens than there is now. And there could be a lot of reasons for this. It's not that it was anything abnormal. It's just that probably, to use the expression of Victor Klub, a very legendary comet researcher and astronomer from Scotland. Episodic bombardment is kind of like the history of the Earth, and our planet has been episodically bombarded throughout its history. And so their work talks about how the sun is gradually moving as the arm of the galaxy that it's in rotates, but also its own sort of individual proper motion as an autonomous star within the whole local supercluster and all the surrounding stellar neighborhood. So there's all kinds of perpetual motion going on that's constantly bringing in new sort of geometric and gravitational and energetic influences and factors. And for that reason alone, I don't think that we can necessarily rely on repeating cycles of anything to always hold true in terms of describing anything that's happening in the world of nature. We like to do that because it's like symbolic language, using a word to stand for something that, the word tree, every tree is different, but do we have time or the mental ability to describe that information? No. We're satisfied with confusing the map with the territory. We're happy with the word tree instead of the infinite number of individual trees that exist, each of which is different. The same with everything. War of the gods, Theomachy. Were the gods battling each other? Were the planets seen as gods and other forces of nature like, the Dreamtime ancestors? We still really don't have any understanding of what the forces of nature or who they actually are or might be. We tend to just sort of settle for our own, whatever the belief system of the day is. And I'm not really one to say whether to refer to electricity as a force or as a being, which one's more accurate, because it might be both or neither. Cataclysmic evolution is an expression that Immanuel Velikovsky used, and it's actually not exactly accurate etymologically, because Cataclysmos in Greek, I learned from somebody from Greece, that Cataclysmos refers to catastrophe due to water only, to floods. So cataclysm would mean like the Great Flood and different kind of disasters having to do with large quantities of water. But I think really what Velikovsky meant was catastrophic evolution, because he's drawing a difference between the Darwinian aspect of evolution being a long, slow, uniformitarian process whereby features and qualities and characteristics of a species might gradually change over very long periods of time and somehow giving rise to new species. But what Velikovsky said is that even though that might be true to an extent, that's kind of the background against which the much more fundamental and important changes in our evolutionary history have occurred very abruptly over short periods of time, at least geologically speaking, due to catastrophic influences usually occurring from forces originating outside the Earth, extraterrestrial if you want to call it, like impacts from comets and asteroids, close encounters with other planets or other rogue bodies passing through the Earth, passing through the tail of a comet or a cloud of dust, being bombarded by energetic emanations from the galactic core or from a supernova, or, all these different things are happening all the time. So this is leading me to what I mean by domain overlay complexity, abbreviated DOC. It's a new thing I just came up with today, but I've used this kind of framework several times before. Really, I first sort of articulated it in my article last November when I was in Rarotonga. There was a multiple species stranding of cetaceans happening in several parts of New Zealand and Australia simultaneously. And this was the one where the American girl that was hiking on Stewart Island found about 100 pilot whales that were stranded and still alive, and she was just in shock and awe by it all. And so I started looking into this, and there was, because of the anomalous nature, there was no overt indicators of what might have caused this. So we concluded that because of the widespread yet simultaneous nature across several species of cetaceans, that it was very likely that it pointed to covert military activity in the Trans-Tasman Sea, which is probably submarine warfare from the ANZAC and USA coalition, because a lot of that naval stuff has been shifted to down under because they can just get away with a lot more. And we aren't allowed to know where submarines are. But once they've been there and doing all their dirty work with the underwater microwaves, courtesy of Raytheon that Terry Lilly's always telling us about, and all different kinds of stuff, the drones and drone swarms and directed energy weapons, and all this can operate underwater now. Autonomous vehicles, all this just unleashed. So whenever this kind of thing has been happening, we may not know it's there, but we can see the aftermath of what it caused. Many of these different species of cetaceans to freak out and strand, and so that it's like knowing there's a fire from the smoke or the smoking gun. So domain overlay complexity, here's what it is. Whenever I try to describe the scenario with what the real global threats to whales and dolphins are, I point out that, well, first of all, you've got to look at the natural world that's always existed since the beginning of life. And it's the natural world in which we have all evolved in a very beautiful and harmonious and well-adapted way. And there's all kind of factors that might, for example, influence why whales and dolphins might strand. For example, they could have inner ear parasites. They could have got lost and followed the leader into a shallow area. Or some people say that maybe they went to an area where they hadn't been in so long that the geology of the area had changed. But, all of these are not really very believable. I mean, they could be true. Other people have said that there could be solar storms or coronal mass ejections whose energy might disrupt their navigation, disruptions in the magnetic field, all this different kind of stuff. But the point is, everything that's happening in the world of today, no matter what species or what ecological niche you're looking at, the background of the world and the earth and nature, the same stuff is going on now that's always been there. We've got the ocean, the waves crashing, we've got the hydrological cycle, we've got the river running to the sea, we've got all the life forms reproducing and running around, and we've got the atmosphere, we've got the weather changing from day to day, we've got the sunrise and the seasons and the stars and the meteors and the comets and the planets and the climate that changes from, for example, the Carboniferous era many millions of years ago that had 9,000 parts per million of carbon dioxide, yet everything was thriving, maybe just a little warmer. It certainly wasn't burning up. So no matter what we're looking at, whether we're looking at the climate change scenario or we're looking at whales and dolphins or anything else, all the things that have always been there are still there now. They may have changed a little bit. They may have ebbed and flowed, or, I'm sort of saying, like in musical expression and composition, most music is based on cycles. Like we've got the official sort of the formal sonata form for a composition that has the exposition, development, and then the recapitulation where you come back to the initial theme and sort of create a cycle, beginning with what you ended on and ending on what you began on. But there's a different kind of musical composition called a fantasia that just sort of goes on and on and on and on and on, kind of like me talking, and it doesn't repeat itself. And so I think that the universal cosmic natural processes are probably more like fantasias than they are sonatas. But there would be elements of both, because we do have the repeating cycle of day and night, we have the repeating cycle of the seasons, the repeating cycle of the sunspot cycle, and all different kind of stuff like this. But just because it's been doing it the same for a long time doesn't mean that it always will, or that it's going to be constant. So again, we're talking about the incredible complexity of the real world that our brains and minds aren't really capable of dealing with, even if we wanted to. Domain overlay complexity. You've got the background of all the complex and multi-various factors, the natural archetypes and forces and energy exchanges and ecosystems and everything. That's there going along as it always has. And the long, slow, uniformitarian evolutionary process of Darwin. Overlaid on top of that is the presence of Homo sapiens, man the wise. Now, all the other species of life live here on the earth too. But we're the only ones that have sort of, in recent times, geologically, have sought to defy the balance of nature and kind of stray from the true path of the Great Spirit, both spiritually and pragmatically. And I believe that it all really started when we began to violate the fundamental Hopi prophecy that Thomas Banyaka told us about in 1986. If we dig precious things from the land, we will invite disaster. And he's not talking about carrots and parsnips. He's talking about digging out gold, coal, hydrocarbons, diamonds, iron, uranium, even stone that we quarry to make pyramids and cinder blocks. We were never really meant to do that. So then we built cities, which were originally forts, and then gone on to give birth to a planetary juggernaut, military-industrial civilization. So the effect of Homo sapiens, which Lauren Isley has likened to a cellular slime mold in his brilliant chapter called The Spore Bearers, the World Eaters and the Spore Bearers. The world of man the wise is increasingly artificial and engineered. And this is increasing exponentially, week by week, day by day, hour by hour. And a lot of it's driven by computers. Computer technology is what's making a lot of this possible. So overlaid onto the world of nature and all those processes that are still going on now, some of them are, these processes are being influenced or disrupted to varying degrees by the presence of human global military industrial civilization. And we've got all kinds of sort of involuntary side effects of military industrial civilization. Chemical toxicity, radiological toxicity, electromagnetic pollution, noise, effects like deforestation and desertification, acid rain, all different kind of stuff. We aren't doing this on purpose, but it's a direct result of military-industrial civilization. So we've got the side effects of the MIC overlaid on top of all the natural processes. And then alongside these unintentional side effects are our deliberate attempts to do things like weather modification and tectonic warfare, electromagnetic, ionospheric heater modification of the ionospheres to try to conduct geophysical warfare and planetary geoengineering for a whole variety of different kind of reasons. And it's like the Atlantean scientists running off the rail. So anyway, that's what I mean by domain overlay complexity, DOC. The simultaneous existence of all the stuff that humanity is doing, both as a side effect and our deliberate attempts to influence and affect nature, wage war on ourselves, overlaid on top of all the archaic natural processes that are continually but slowly changing. So against this background is the context in which we have to try to evaluate anything we want to look at in the world of today, whether it's climate change or the real global threats to the whales and dolphins, human health. Everything on this planet, everybody is living in this kind of context. Now, another really important thing about this time of year, the late October, early November inky window, as I call it, is that in early November, I believe it was the 5th of November of 2015, I was on Great Barrier Island, Aotea, New Zealand, and had been very fortunate to be able to swim with a pod of dolphins almost every day for a week. They were around. They had come over after I went with my Didge over to Haratonga one day. They came over to Arafaro the next day and hung out for a week, and I'd been out there swimming with them and very, very close, psychologically, psychically, telepathically connected with these lovely dolphins. And some of them might even have been ones that Lisbon and I first encountered there at that exact spot in 2009. So anyway, one day I'd been swimming with the dolphins, and I'd been filming them doing these really radical maneuvers through the waves. Got out and went back and was sitting at my little desk painting. And all of a sudden, wham, I received this image in my mind. And I'm a very visual person and have done my share of psychedelics, and I'm familiar with images appearing in my mind. But this was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before, qualitatively and in terms of the intensity of it. And it really didn't seem like it originated from me. But it was instantaneous and so powerful that I instantly knew what it was supposed to be. And I drew a little picture down of it that I have just now, 4 years later, started working into a painting, and I painted it on a rock, a couple of rocks. But it's an impression of what a comet or asteroid might look like during the couple of seconds as it would be passing through the atmosphere on its way to hit the Earth at or near the point where the observer was standing. That would be me, or that would be the dolphins that saw it. So the implication of this image, this transmission, was that the dolphins were telling me that their ancestors had witnessed something like this and lived to tell. And I don't have an exact time frame, but it could have been that this had happened more than once. I believe that the whales and dolphins have not only their vast collective memory that they can all individually access and share, but they haven't repressed a lot of these memories of ancient catastrophes and cataclysms that their ancestors might have had to live through, that might have been life-threatening and almost brought them to the verge of extinction many, many times. This is one of Immanuel Velikovsky's primary hypotheses, that humanity has been repeatedly traumatized so severely by cosmic catastrophes throughout the history of our existence that we're essentially acting like a traumatized psychiatric patient, where because of our refusal to access these memories and thereby deal with them and free ourselves from their influence, because they're influencing our behavior unconsciously, it's driving us to both emulate the gods being the destructive forces of nature, or maybe the planets and comets. So it's a very interesting thing to consider that our otherwise inexplicable obsession with creating ever more advanced technologies that are weapons aimed at ourselves and at Mother Earth and all our fellow life forms. And this keeps going further and further every day. And to me it seems like a non-human agenda that relates to Dr. John Lilly's vision of a solid state entity a silicon-based form of quote-unquote intelligence who has been using us to construct it. But when the time comes that it doesn't need us anymore, who knows what might happen. So that's a separate but related story that I'm developing in an upcoming show about the search for extraterrestrial intelligence and artificial intelligence, what we mean by intelligence, and the whole planetary electrical grid and computer network. The image the dolphins transmitted to me seemed to mean two things: that their ancestors had witnessed at least one impact like that, and probably many more. They lived to tell, but there's no information content about what they had to go through or how long the effects lasted for. But the more relevant part is this, and the second part that was equally important, is that they were telling me this because something like that is getting ready to happen again soon. And again, I don't have a time frame, but what blew me away like a year or two ago was when I realized that there was information contained in when they sent the message to me, because they sent it to me right in the middle of the November, late October, early November inky window, November 5th, 2015. So that alone told me that they knew a lot about this kind of thing. And I had already been drawn to understanding comets, but this really pushed my interest in comets and asteroids to the next level. And it's ongoing, my continual research. And in fact, I'm going to try to do an interview with Walter Alvarez. It was he and his dad who they discovered the layer of iridium, which is a radioactive element in the same family as platinum. And actually, I'm using the color of iridium is pretty much the same color as my hair, so I'm saying that I'm an iridium blonde now. But Lewis and Walter Alvarez, kind of, according to Fred Watson, the Australian astronomer who I've interviewed, the Alvarez team kind of stole the thunder of Victor Clube and Bill Napier, because their work had been describing episodic bombardment and the likelihood of the Earth being adversely affected by impacts from comet and asteroids, but not one specific event, like the Chicxulub event that Alvarez talked about, and as an ongoing part of the history of Earth, as borne out in the geological record, and that would be one of the primary driving factors behind Velikovsky's scenario of cataclysmic evolution. Now, we've got a big flock of birds flying over the beach now. I think they're seagulls. There's all kind of birds here. Little hooded plovers. They make kind of like a little cheeping sound. So if we look at life on Earth, and not even necessarily a look at her origins, but at once life was established here, how it's been influenced. And so there's a lot of, everything's an influence if you really think about it, but in terms of there could be a lot of significant factors originating outside the Earth along the lines of what I'm talking about, which is part of the ongoing cosmic context. We think about radiation as something being bad, ionizing radiation, but it's not, because the Earth has very tiny amounts of uranium in topsoil everywhere. And uranium, in its natural form, emits very minuscule amounts of ionizing radiation, but this might be actually essential for life. And so it would be hard to look at any aspect, any chemical, any element, any substance, any factor that's been ubiquitous for the evolution of life, and to pull that out and say, well, life would have been fine without that, but we just don't know. It's possible, like for example, we might talk about removing all the nitrogen from the atmosphere, because we think that it's not important to how we breathe. But just like our so-called junk DNA, that's about 90% of all our DNA, or the metaphorical 90% of our brain that we don't use, all this stuff, if we actually didn't have it, would everything else still work properly? It's the kind of thing I don't want to try to find out, because I'm guessing that we would learn that it's probably, all of these things are absolutely essential in ways that we have no idea or comprehension of. So we're back to the DOC hypothesis again, looking at all the different factors that have existed and still do. And I think the idea of Theomachy is very interesting if we want to look at the archetypes of the planets and where the ideas of, for example, a lot of the Dreamtime ancestors in Australian Aboriginal cosmology are very much like archetypes, these gods, these forces of nature, the gods of ancient Greece and Rome and Egypt. Ra, the god of the sun; Poseidon, the god of the sea; Zeus, the hurler of thunderbolts. And it does make a lot of sense, the idea of our emulation of the gods, or our attempt to. And it leads me to wonder if the idea of teleology, which implies a purposiveness to for example, a planetary catastrophe. Mainstream science would say if a giant flood destroys a civilization, or if a comet impacts and takes out 90% of life, they'd go like, wow, that's a shame. It was a random occurrence due to gravitational attractions and perturbations of orbits and things like that. Very sad, the collateral damage that about 99% of all life forms were taken out on the Earth. And this kind of thing might have happened before. And so you might say, like, well, if this happened hundreds of millions of years ago when there was no human civilization, it'd be really hard to say that from a teleological perspective that was done on purpose by somebody for some reason, because it would be implying that one or more life forms on the Earth had been deviating from their true path or misbehaving in some kind of way. So who knows? I'm going to have to ask Sherlock Holmes about that, because this is one of the riddles that really need to be approached from a whole new perspective that the Holmesian dialectic seems really brilliant at creating progress and thinking about stuff like this. But from a teleological perspective, if something like that happened now, would it be just a random act of nature, or humanity being punished because we've been violating the true path of the Great Spirit since we began to dig precious things from the land, and we've been desecrating the planet that we've been blessed? We were supposed to be the gardeners and caretakers and kaitiakis of life, and instead we've just been laying it waste and killing and mutating and eating and destroying every possible ecosystem and life form, and including ourselves. And it's going to the next level with our planetary level technologies. At any rate, not that we can understand the reason. And like Carl Jung talked about with synchronicity, if we perceive two or more events happening at approximately the same time, he calls it synchronicity, which literally just means that they're happening at the same time. But he did not imply any causality. It's a way that these events are connected. They're connected in time and perception, but not necessarily with any causality. So, if the dolphins have been telling us that an impending impact with a comet or asteroid is imminent, and it seems that human industrial civilization has got to the point where it's just become a threat and a danger to all other life, the tyrants of the earth, in the words of Joseph Wood Crutch, the famous desert writer and naturalist. would that mean that our evil that we've been living in terms of our desecration of life, did that bring on the comet impact? That, to me, seems necessary for the healing of Koyaanisqatsi, so that Mother Earth is going to have to do something really radical like that in order to get rid of us, because we've become so entrenched, like literally and metaphorically. Anyway, this is all stuff I walk around thinking about all the time, and I think it's extremely important that we all think about it. That's why I am honoring my 300th broadcast of On the Brink Radio with these, what I consider to be some of the most important ideas that I've ever talked about on this show. Ultimately, I'm trying to draw attention to the existence of ways of being, modes of perception, types of knowledge that are totally beyond anything that humans are capable of or are even aware of or could comprehend. Regardless of what the underlying causative factors could be behind how cometary and asteroid impacts have happened with the Earth, it's irrefutable. The geological record testifies to the fact that this has happened probably countless times in the history of the Earth, and probably many, many, many times in the history of what we call civilization. But our ability to remember is not that great. And that's even if we really wanted to remember everything. So when we add in the psychological denial, repression factor, it's amazing that we even remember anything even from yesterday, if it's stuff you don't want to remember. Anyway, but we have a lot to thank the whales and dolphins for, not the least of which is probably that they helped us to become people a long, long, long time ago. And they're constantly sending us their beautiful psychic transmissions of love and awareness, their connection with the spirit of water. And you can look at it scientifically. The global ocean, because of the unique properties of water, is like one giant macromolecule of water with very amazing properties. A spherical aqueous antenna that could pick up on information or energy or signals from other planets and other star systems that might have similar planetary bodies of water. Or it could be that any little body of water, whether it's a lake or a tarn or a drop or even an ice crystal, might have unique properties. And so any life form that we know, what we call life, that's based on carbon and a few other elements, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, largely consists of water. So more than any other substance, water is life. Water and life are almost synonymous. And so you've got water would have a life of its own, even not even counting the life forms that we can see that live in it, but on its own. And I think the whales and dolphins are very aware of this. They're light years beyond our awareness. And Dr. John Lilly envisioned that the whales and dolphins were actually, he used the expression repeater stations, that they were in touch with water-based life on other planets and other star systems, that they were responsible and involved in bringing down, transmitting and receiving signals from water-based life to and from the Earth to connect us with the galactic network of water-based life planets, but also to help in maintaining the health and balance and well-being of Mother Earth as an oceanic planet that hosts to myriad life forms based on water. So this would be inimical to the alternate form of, if you want to use the word intelligence, the silicon-based, electronic, computer-based entity that he also envisioned that we were creating here. But that's another whole story in itself that I'm going to go into with probably my next radio show about SETI and AI. And also, I've been inspired to get in touch with some of the top AI, that's artificial intelligence researchers that work for IBM in San Jose, California, the sort of the belly of the beast of the solid state entity. So that's going to be coming up soon. In November, we've got a new interview with Nick Begich coming up. And after the first of the year, a follow-up interview with Fritjof Capra. And I really like to thank Sherlock Holmes for being able to use Doctor Who's TARDIS to conduct our last week's interview. I'm hoping to have him back, possibly when we can speak in person with a better connection. I'd really like to thank other investigative researchers and detectives who have been very influential on me, whose spirit I call on, including John Drake of Danger Man, Ilya Kuryakin of Man from U.N.C.L.E., Fox Mulder and Dana Scully of The X-Files, and David Vincent, the architect in The Invaders. All these people. Also, Clarice Starling, played by Jodie Foster, who was the investigator in Silence of the Lambs, who the character of Scully was based on, according to the creator of The X-Files. Anyway, I'm sitting here over a cliff looking at my most beautiful special flower, the Senecio elegans, that they've been trying to pull up on Great Barrier Island. I was really surprised to find some. I came to a little place right now to record the show that I've never been, and it's just like touching my heart to have this beautiful flower here with me. So in the spirit of Senecio elegans and all the beautiful life forms and creations of Mother Earth, and interestingly, very interestingly, my friend from South Africa told me that this plant in South Africa, they call it the Michaelmas daisy. Michaelmas is a holiday, I think in October, that has to do with the Saint Michael and who battled the dragon in the Bible, but that the blooming of this flower is associated with a meteor shower that's probably the Orionids that just happened a couple of nights ago, because the Orionids are the remnants of Halley's Comet, in the same way that the Taurids are the remnants of Enki. So right now, between the Orionids and the second Enki window is a time, because my friend Carissa said that it's also associated with the iron that was brought to Earth by these meteors, and that has to do with the influencing the blooming of these flowers. And also the iron is associated with his sword and armor and his ability to battle the dragon. So this is some very powerful archetypes, energies connecting with right now. Very, very cool at this sacred moment of time here on the Great Ocean Road. And tonight, I'm probably going to be able to do some astronomical photography for the first time since Great Barrier Island, because it's going to be a clear night, and tomorrow it's going to probably be up to 32. And the moon is at getting close to about 4 days before new, coming in from the waning side. So late tonight, early in the morning will be great to get some astronomical photos. And you know what? Maybe I'll even come to this exact spot where I am right now. Anyway, many thanks to Jill Stanley at UCY, my friend Gail Palmer here in Apollo Bay, my two new little Kaitiakis joining the family, Kylie Koala and Peter Platypus. This is Jeff Phillips Wefferson signing off from On the Brink Radio. Keep it in the road. Live simply so that others may simply live. Kia Manuia and aloha. Good day.